let's talk about how we can help that little dude. Nope, hated that. Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome and welcome back to the channel. So this week we're going to talk about something that most ball python owners either have worried about or will worry about in the future with their ball pythons, and that is ball pythons not eating. So basically we're going to talk about a few different things that you can try if your ball python is refusing to eat, and hopefully it will help you out. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by iHeartGecko, so make sure to stay until the end of this video to find out all about this amazing company. Let's get started. So first and foremost, it is completely normal for ball pythons to go on pretty long hunger strikes. This is one of the reasons that many people kind of hesitate to say that they're beginner reptiles. And while most of the time it's completely normal, it could mean that something else is wrong, like respiratory infections or sometimes rarely parasites, things like that. So for a newcomer to ball pythons, it can become very difficult very quickly to figure out if something's actually wrong with your ball python or if they're just completely normal and they're just being stubborn. So if anything else is going on with your ball python, if they are losing weight, make sure you are using a scale to weigh them. If it's been a while since they've eaten, make sure that weight's not going down by a lot. If they are panting with their mouths open, if you see any kind of mucus or anything from their mouth, if they have injuries, if you notice that they are shedding very rapidly, any other concerning signs that go along with the not eating need to be paid attention to. But if your ball python's not eating, let's talk about how we can help them out. First thing, check your hotspot temperature. Make sure that you are using a temperature gun to measure the temperature in the tank. Make sure that their hotspot is at least 90 degrees, but make sure you check those temperatures, especially if you notice that your ball python is only staying on the cold side or they are staying on the hot side all the time. Another thing you want to be aware of is if the temperature in your house has dropped. If it's very cold in your house, they may not eat because these animals are used to eating less during the winter time. If it is breeding season and they are near a female, if they can smell that female, Sterling does this every single year. Also, look to see if your ball python is going to shed soon, because a shedding ball python isn't really going to eat. And they usually won't eat for the couple of weeks before they shed, and that is completely normal. All those things you want to pay attention to because they could be a very quick indicator that that thing is wrong and it's an easy fix. One big thing to try is switching out the rodents that you are feeding. So ball pythons, for the most part, usually prefer rats over mice, but your ball python might prefer mice over rats, which is easy to do as long as they're not huge, because mice only get so big. Also, maybe your ball python doesn't want that big of a rodent. It is always a good idea too to just try to size down the rodent, and that might encourage them to eat. Yes, they are going to be eating less, but they are still eating something. Some people have found that changing the color of the mice helps. I know that there are some people's ball pythons that will only eat white rats or black rats or rats with certain colors of eyes. Change those things out and see if it works. Also, if you're feeding frozen thawed rodents, make sure that that rodent is warm enough. You don't want to cook the rodent, you don't want it to be hot, but you can use a temperature gun to just check on the temperature of the rat and make sure that it is about the same temperature as their hotspot in the 90s. Just trying to basically get it to the body temperature of that rodent if it was alive, because if your rodent is still cold, your ball python isn't going to be able to use their heat pins to sense that rodent and find it, so they're not going to want it. On that same sort of note, sometimes ball pythons prefer either wet or dry frozen thawed rodents. Most of the time, ball pythons are going to want that rodent to be dry. However, there are a few situations that I have heard of that the ball pythons actually would only eat them if they were wet, so that is something you can try. Another super simple trick that you can do is just change the way that you are holding the rodent. Normally, I think the gut reaction when dangling frozen thawed rodents over your ball python is to grab it by the tail, but sometimes that doesn't work, and grabbing them by the scruff on the back of their neck actually works better sometimes. You can also try just leaving it. Some ball pythons do not like their food to be dangled in front of them, and they would prefer if you just stick it in there, close the tank, and just leave. If your ball python has not eaten for quite a while, one of the best things that you can do is to actually take the ball python and put it into a separate, like, Sterilite bin or some other separate container where it's only them and the rodent. Basically, them just running into this rodent over and over again as they are in this small space, eventually most of the time they will eat it. Just be careful after they have consumed that rodent that you are careful in gently putting them back in their tank and you're not stressing them out, because that could lead to regurgitation. I normally do not suggest feeding your ball python outside of their tank. There used to be a misconception that if you fed your snake in the tank, they would start biting you if you put your hand in the tank. That isn't true most of the time, and that actually can cause more stress because you are then having to move that snake back into their tank right after they've eaten. If it is available to you, getting fresh killed rodents also helps a lot, especially if they were on live and you're trying to switch them to frozen. This was a huge one that we used with Sylvanas. We were switching her over to frozen thawed rodents because she was originally on live when we got her, and it worked fantastically. Not only did it make sure that she was eating, but it also helped her to transition to those frozen thawed, which are safer for your snake. This next one is going to be super gross, so just a heads up on that before we talk about it. That is braining your rodents. This is something that really... This is something that, again, I have never been able to do, but I know a lot of people have really good success with it. And it's basically where you are taking an already dead rodent, the rodent is already dead, and you are opening its head so that your ball python can really smell the rodent. I'm smiling because this one makes me really uncomfortable, but it does work if it is something that you want to do. That is definitely a possibility for getting that ball python to eat. And this last one is kind of a last resort, but it is not something that you shouldn't do if your ball python is starving, and that is feeding live. This isn't even legal in a lot of countries, but here in the United States, it is legal, and I've gotten comments in the past about why would we not feed live to ball pythons if that's how it is in the wild. And there's a couple different reasons for that. So in the wild, if a rat sees that a snake is in the vicinity, they might just take off running. In a closed container with just them and a snake, that rat is going to see that threat, and instead of taking the flight reflex and fight or flight, they're gonna go straight for fight. And rodents can and have injured ball pythons because ball pythons are not aggressive animals. Sometimes it's just going to sit there or ball up and get very injured. In addition, even if they did attack that rodent and had it and they were eating it, a live rodent again is going to fight back and they could severely injure your ball python. This is a risk, yes, in the wild that ball pythons would face, but since they don't have to face it in captivity, there's no reason to make them face that. I highly, obviously, advocate for not feeding live rodents to ball pythons. Go with frozen thawed. However, if you're in a situation where maybe you get a ball python that has been fed live its whole life and it is refusing to eat anything else, after it's been a while of not eating, especially if you notice that your ball python is getting sick, don't let your ball python starve to death. I said feeding live was the last possible scenario, but I was wrong. Force feeding your ball python is something that should only be done at the very last ditch chance. Something has to be done right now or my ball python is going to starve to death. This should only be done, number one, after you've taken your ball python to the vet and they have been cleared of any other sicknesses, and honestly, only if your vet says that they should be force fed, because force feeding your ball python is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. I just needed to throw it out there because I knew that someone would comment below and say that this was an option. If you are going this route, please make sure it has been cleared with a vet, or even if you know someone that has been breeding ball pythons for 30 years and they know what they're doing, make sure you consult a professional on this before you attempt it. That is really about all I have for this video, but if you have other methods that have worked for your ball python when they're going through these hunger strikes, let me know in the comments below because it might help out someone else who is going through this similar issue and have tried all of my tips. As I said at the beginning of this video is sponsored by iHeartGeckos. iHeartGeckos is an awesome company that makes conversion kits for old aquariums that you may have laying around, and they allow you to turn those tanks into vertically standing front opening tanks for your arboreal lizards. They also do have some horizontal kits as well if you need one one for a terrestrial animal. I have had a couple people ask me about ventilation. They are concerned that there's not enough ventilation in it, but I have had this tank set up for over a year. Plants are doing fantastically. They're growing. She's doing fantastic. She's chunky and beautiful and happy, and the cleanup crew is multiplying like crazy. The soil doesn't get wet and soppy and muddy, even with this tank being sprayed down every single night, because this is a humidity loving creature, and so it does dry out during the day. The ventilation is fantastic on these. Make sure if you are going to order one of these awesome conversion kits, you put Elle's Reptiles in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so that way they know that you guys are coming from here. Thank you so much to iHeartGeckos for sponsoring this video. As always, if you have not already, please feel free to follow me on my other socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is every Sunday and some Wednesdays. More Wednesday videos are coming eventually. This week's Instagram shout out goes to Shoko the Doggo for following me on Instagram and going through and liking a whole bunch of my stuff. And this week's subscriber shout out goes to Haley Trevino for commenting on last week's video. Thank you guys both so much. You are the bee's knees. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Okay. That's something that all ball python owners, they're worried about or will worried about. Like that. So this week, it becomes, a new, the amount of time that I have spent on Craigslist the last couple weeks is terrible. I almost had a new little critter yesterday, but then the person decided to up the price as opposed to the price that they posted, which I wasn't gonna do that. But look at this adorableness. The disappointment.